Okay, so we have Rebecca Harrington here to show off a little online offering piece of software called Articulate. You can get a 30-day trial on the web if you want to try it out. The TLTC also has a few copies in a lab, so if you're serious about creating content, come on down to the middle basement and see us, and we'll let you use it. I will give it over to Rebecca.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about Articulate Storyline 3. I wanted to kind of start out with maybe a story, a little bit of it, because I think the way things look right now, there's going to be the career that I had before learning this software program, and at this point there's definitely a tangible shift in my career and my practice because I have gained the use of this program. And so March 28th, 2016, like not very often do you recall the day that you learned about a software program, and I think that's that story in and of itself. So what was I doing on March 28th, 2016? I was called up to a meeting of SUNY and CUNY professionals in Albany. It was kind of called together by the Title IX officer at SUNY Albany, Chantal Cleary, and Joe Storch at SUNY Legal, and then they kind of brought together a group of people that represented not just Title IX and legal people, but this was looking at sexual violence prevention education. So we had people who were educators with more public health background, and we had representatives from the Department of Health. We had Title IX officers from a variety of different schools. We had some of the folks from the central administration within the CUNY system, kind of thinking like, could we create an online program that would hit all of the mandates that we needed to do? So let me back up just a tiny bit. So this is kind of the problem that we were facing that day. We have a mandate to provide education to students from both the federal level and then from a SUNY and state level about educating all incoming students about some minimum things related to sexual violence prevention. There's a cost related to that. I'm going to talk about that pretty quick. There's the cost of online education versus the cost of doing it in person because we have to track and we have to be audited. And then also kind of the educator questions that we ask ourselves, like what's best for our students, what is best for our institution, and what makes best sense within our practice as professionals who are overseeing these courses. The timeline that we were dealing with leading up to this in terms of the road to online education and mandated training is there were a number of online vendors that were seeking out institutions of higher education as clients, and they were providing alcohol education online. And it's a really interesting thing in the world of public health and prevention education on college campus. There's this pendulum that swings back and forth between alcohol and sexual violence. And at this point, when these things were rising up, we were clearly in alcohol land. And so there's this proliferation of third-party vendors, and they're just kind of cropping up. There's a handful of them, and we started using a program here. It was around 2008. Plus or minus a year or two. And the program that we started using was actually designed by a professor in the University of North Carolina system, had really good evaluation on it. We applied that. We didn't mandate it for students. We just highly encouraged students to take this course. It was limited success. The third-party vendors start to eat each other up. You've got this, we want that. And so there's this kind of big fish in the pond that starts scooping up some of these little vendors. We shifted vendors at one point. We had a year where we had some serious consequences for some students related to alcohol, and so the administration decided, okay, now we're going to start mandating this because we need to ensure that these students have gotten this alcohol education. So we shift to this one in 2013 and have some success and some not success. This was kind of at the point when the pendulum's starting to swing towards sexual violence education. And so the third-party vendors that were doing all this alcohol education are like, oh, we should also offer some sexual violence education as well, and maybe we can throw that in as a teaser. And so that's what happened is our alcohol and other drug coordinator was searching for a new vendor. because the one we'd been using had gotten eaten up and wasn't going to exist anymore. And one of these ones is like, we'll also give you the sexual violence component for this much smaller cost. And I'm like, well, that's not bad. And I reviewed the content, and at that point, as somebody who really had 2 feet firmly in the world of sexual violence prevention, I've been watching many of these and being like, well, they don't do any harm. I'm not like really thrilled with any of the content that they're delivering, but as a bare bones, I can live with this. Like, this is something I wouldn't normally get. We had a horrible technology experience with them. They had glitches on their end. They weren't communicating them back. I was dealing with angry parents because we were putting holds on accounts for students who were not in completion, and it was a pain in the butt. And so that whole year, again, like every listserv I was on was being blasted by, this is our newest program, please view it. And I'm watching some of them, they're horrible. There was one that another colleague of mine came back from a conference having seen and said, oh, we should look at this. And I was like, no, because the students will find me and seek me and punish me severely. It was like trying to be like Second Life. It was like so not cool. I was like, I couldn't even finish it. So 2014, we shipped it to a new vendor because I stumbled upon one that I really liked. It had been really pushed by a college in California. They had really designed it. Their students were a really active part of the design and the content, and they were already doing some legal mandates for their faculty and staff with this one vendor. And they said, hey, we want you to build us one for students. I really loved what they did. They too have gotten eaten up by the big fish in the pond, and the costs have gone up incrementally. So we're looking at rising costs, and that was really kind of in the back of our heads. We had been spending, when we were with this vendor before they got bought out, we were spending about $8,500 a year just to hit our incoming students. They sent me a contract for $18,000 when I asked for 1 year to build an alcohol, because I was thinking initially, well, I'll build this sexual violence course, then I'll take a year and build an alcohol course, and then we can be totally weaned off. And then when they sent us that bill, I was like, yeah, we're just going to do this really quick. It's not going to be super great, but I don't have $18,000. Like, we just don't have that, but obviously some universities do. So there's all these possibilities, but the cost is going up and up and up and up and up and up. So there's that part. In the meantime, on the backside, sexual violence land, we have the White House taking up sexual violence as an issue and really promoting that. Joe Biden was really a huge part of the Violence Against Women Act, so money going to services and realizing that we need to get out there with prevention. I think also around this time we have that shift in our students who know how to find each other on social media, so students who are having bad experiences with their colleges are finding each other and using that activism skill that seemed pretty innate with this new generation. So by 2015, SUNY drafts a system-wide policy for sexual violence. It kind of gets dropped in December of that year, and it's like 15 pages of itty-bitty print, and in there is, this, you will educate all incoming students, and that by the next summer becomes the basis for what becomes Educational Law 129B in New York State, which is basically the SUNY sexual violence misconduct policy now applied to all colleges. And the other shift was that initially the language here was all sexual violence, and then there was kind of this and also domestic violence and dating violence and stalking and harassment. So it got codified a little bit better. So, and within that, New York State suddenly puts this lump of money down. They're applying this to all institutions of higher education within New York State to meet all of these mandates. And there's going to be audits by the New York State Department of Health on a regular basis. So we just went through our first auditing cycle this past summer, but part of what I had to send were these Excel spreadsheets that said, yes, this student took this course on this date going back X number of years. So we came through with flying colors. And I think this is part of it. We just had a system in place. We were moving on it, but truthfully, SUNY had an extra 6 or 7 months, and we had each other to support each other. So, we're going through this. We're sitting on this meeting in March 26 and saying, can we do this? Unfortunately, we're at SUNY Albany, and they've got a really great IT department. We got one of their Blackboard people in the room with us. We had her for 90 minutes. We're like, we need to, she kind of flipped it on us. What do you need it to do? We initially talked, well, wouldn't it also be great if it would interact with our database systems? And SUNY Albany has taken it to, they're interacting it with PeopleSoft, which is their system. When I talk with the Banner people, they're like, Banner, change is coming, we're not touching it, that's cool. I don't know if we really need it, but they were thinking if you could connect it, then there might be some demographic data that we could pull later to look at things. So I think they are using some other additional, I think they got it as far as like they could do one export from Blackboard and one import into PeopleSoft, and we're connecting data that way. So we walked away from that first meeting. I mean, this is what we walked in, like somebody had taken the time of like, these are all the things that we have to do. And we had that distilled. And we talked about, okay, we have these audits that are going to come up. We're going to need trackability. We're going to need to launch it to incoming students, but who else might we need to launch it to? I think faculty and staff, there's some mandates about how we educate faculty and staff, and that's kind of still Andrew Stammel on the rope. So we have to do this, Andrew. We walked away that day with, big Post-it paper, newsprint, like these are the things that we think, and we started to populate it. And I had dragged Andy Bradfield with me to that meeting. Andy has a master's degree in instructional technology or something like that. And he'd been kind of in my back pocket of like, at some point, I'm going to need him. And I was also afraid that when I got to this meeting that I would volunteer, because that's just who I am. And I recognize that as my own weakness of like, I should have somebody else from my own campus to volunteer with me. So poor Andy spent, hours as we're listening, sexual violence, blah, 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 blah. And then like, we probably around 2 o'clock is like, how are we going to build this? And he's like, I know the software program, and he pulls it up on his phone, and off and running we were with Articulate Storyline. But Andy and I kind of came back, and he was the residence hall director in Higgins, and we used the lounge when the students were gone, and we just started cutting and pasting. I took stuff that I had from PowerPoints and started drafting stuff. And that got us to April. I worked through that summer. The nice thing about Articulate Storyline, they have these really nice books. InfoLogic, I think, is the publisher. Icon Logic is the publisher. And I dropped my kid off at school in June when I was off calendar, and I drop him off. I go home, I make a big pot of coffee, and I just worked my way through the tutorials. And I think the loveliness of that is I already kind of had a vision for where I wanted to go. I'd had experiences of looking at other online programs and saying, this seems right, this doesn't seem right, and starting to weave that all together. I would also say through this whole process, I've had so many sleepless nights. Like, I've never had a project in my life that caused that much insomnia. But also, it was exciting too, but stressful. So we originally, once we kind of hit the next academic year, we were like, this is going to take us this whole year to get to fruition. We chose April 4th as our official launch day because it was the anniversary of the Dear Colleague letter, which was a really important date in sexual violence land, because it was the day that, I forget which whatever government body that Betsy DeVos could take back. It's kind of been rescinded, but it was basically like, colleges, this is how you can deal with it, no more of these excuses, like this is how you process stuff. So saying like, we're going to mark this anniversary by doing this really great thing. And then getting to August of this year where we launched it here at SUNY Oneonta for the first time. Albany, I think they launched in January, they hit some glitches over the summer. But the whole idea was, how do we build something that is free or cheap? Because even $700 for an educational license is a huge cost savings versus $20,000 and $25,000 and $35,000 per year. Software you're looking at every other year. SUNY Albany, which has a little bit more power, also gave a grad assistant free tuition for a year to be a builder and pulling the content together. So, and even so, still they'll invest that money once, and now they'll have something that it's not going to take as many hours to do. Also, during that time, their Title IX reports were increasing so significantly that they were hiring 2 assistant Title IX persons. So now that there's more bodies on staff, they'll be able to handle their own updates. But yeah, so SUNY Oneonta became like the beta test for the world, and I got to be the beta test person for the world, which was exciting. So I'd like to have little pauses of cute things. I like squirrels. I've decided my next life, that's what I'm coming back as. They always look like they're having fun. They sleep during the cold days. They eat like mad on the good days. Like this is where I want to go. But as I started training other people, and I've done a tech webinar, WebEx-based series for SUNY about next steps, because we kind of like handed people like this idea and kind of realizing what were some of the things that helped me get here. And I think my music industry degree was a help because I had project management skills from that. And so much of in terms of this project is getting all of the data collected, because once you have the basic articulate skills down, which again, I think you can do that over, a dedicated 30 minutes every morning with your cup of coffee and going through the book. Like, it's not so hard to pick up. It's also having that content to plug in. So, this idea of we need to do it ourselves. We had content developers for some of the legalese. I had content already developed in a lot of places because I was already doing the education. We had SUNY Albany IT answering, they were the ones who figured out how to get it out of Articulate and into Blackboard, so I didn't have to worry about that. And then this whole desire to share back out. We had an ambitious timeline initially. We thought we were going to do this over the first summer. Ha ha, silly us. But these other things too, realizing as you go, there's all these other things, and the getting on board with the accessibility standards was, I think, one of the bigger pieces. I knew it was out there that I had to figure out. And this, being your own tech support. And what tech support is for students sometimes is amazing to me. And I feel like, 15 years ago we were talking about tech immigrants and tech natives, but now we also have the natives to the tech disposable generation. It doesn't work, it's obviously broken, kind of a thing, where I would say that some of my tech support has just been scrolled down, like you just didn't get there yet. So it's been interesting, some of the interactions I've had and learning with students. So this money magically showed up because the Department of Health had $1 million that they needed to spend on sexual violence prevention and offered it to SUNY in that summer of 2017, but that we needed to spend it by October 1st. We found out in June that they were giving us this money. Needed to spend it by then. So the fact that we already had this going, that's where the Articulate licenses came from. I think Oneonta is a perfect size for so many reasons, but it's like how to get to the people you need to, in one step or less. Maybe 2 steps sometimes, but I had access to all of the support people I needed to get out and running to make it happen here. SUNY Legal took on anytime I had content that I wanted to pull in from a third-party vendor or a nonprofit that was willing to share, I could put them in touch with SUNY Legal, and I didn't have to worry about some of those things. And I really just got to do the fun stuff, and I'm like, how often does that happen? And they just get to dive in and do the fun bits and make somebody else do the yucky bits. So we're this first campus. We had about 1,800 students go through in the fall. We had a couple hundred go through now in January. We've had 140 plus institutions have downloaded, and this kind of niche of being a health educator, prevention person who's picked up this skill has put me in an interesting place. So what does a build look like? Because there's all these little different bits and pieces. So Articulate Storyline is one part of building something, but truthfully, most people already have probably 80% of what you need to do. Articulate Storyline is just your delivery method. So when I was talking with other health educators, they seem to do better with this because there's so many of these places that you can say, oh, I have content. I might need some students to videotape. I need all these other things, but there's probably somebody that you can put in charge or identify or put that out for some of these really large projects. Deciding what to include and what not to include, how are we going to do it? Is it going to be a video? Is it going to be a quiz? Is it going to be text? I initially had drag and drop activity in the beginning because Articulate builds these very quickly for you, and then realizing that doesn't meet accessibility standards, so how are we going to navigate that, and how am I going to choose to do that, and how am I going to, what did I decide in the moment because it was easier and I could get it done on my ambitious timetable, versus how do I want to think about doing it in the future. So at this point, I've played around with a couple different ways. So Spark is our sexual violence course, Party Science is our alcohol course, and they are these online, full, encapsulated courses. But what's been exciting is now that I have these skills and I have this comfortableness with Articulate Storyline, I'm using it in some other ways. And I think really where I'm using it are ways, things where I want web-based solutions, but I don't have the HTML building skills, or I don't have the Dreamweaver technology. I can build stuff that is very encapsulated, and the coding just comes with it. So one of the things I did this semester was one of my, maybe it'll load, maybe it won't. This one's been a little glitchy for me. So we'll see if it loads. So one of the things I do every semester is train our RAs on how to handle sexual violence response. And there's a lot of stuff with it, and knowing that we're putting students into these really crisis moments where deer in headlights can happen. So I'm thinking this is not going to work because I might have taken but this idea of what can I do to put in front of them? They have their phones all the time. I just gotta get the content on their phone. So I took the PowerPoint, and one of the lovely things about Articulate is you can pull a whole PowerPoint into it, and then you can start to tinker with it, and it can save you a lot of time. So I took my sexual violence thing, and one of the other struggles with always doing that presentation is it's not a linear presentation. A student will ask a question, and you'll go over here, and it makes perfect sense in the way that question was worded that you got from here to here, but then how do you jump back and cover that content where you left off? It's just this very, and it was a presentation I disliked giving because of that. I couldn't stumble upon the right order of things. So by pushing it into something that was then HTML based, I walked in that morning in August, training day after day after day, hour after hour after hour, came in, program this into your phone, it's here. You have everything you need now, and you can navigate it. It's not beautiful, but it's very functional. Of I have a student with me, they have a question about what their health choices are, we can navigate and get to that pretty quickly. So providing them that. Another thing that we did this semester, I have a group of dietetic students who are sending out to the residence halls to do some, specifically our freshman residence halls, thinking like, how do we help you navigate these nutrition choices now that you're 100% responsible of feeding yourself? And we know that there's so much, fake news proliferates in the nutrition world terribly. So they went out and they were doing stuff around fat and carbs and protein and just what's some basic building block nutrition education that you need to make good choices. So they were talking about these protein, like knowing how many grams of protein you should eat, because we're kind of at a point in our culture where we actually overeat protein in a lot of cases. So they came to me with this, equation of like how to figure this out. But most of the ones online are like, they have advertisers on the side, certain vitamin vendors. There are ones that I would say the other issue, and not so much with protein calculators, but there's a lot of calculators that want you to specify gender. And as an institution that's moving away from gender binary in our language, this becomes an issue too. So what we did is we created this. I bought a bunch of Kindle Fires refurbs for like 20 and 30 bucks. I have like half a dozen of them now that we can go out to tables. We can pull this up. They can enter their weight in here. So you have a student who weighs, number lock, 150 pounds. We can convert that to kilograms is all on the back end. You can code these things into your variables. And then you can say, well, what kind of, you're mostly a couch potato. You want to aim for 54.5 grams of protein a day. So we really quickly help them be able to customize the presentation that they gave to a student. If you're somebody who runs a lot, you get that endurance. If you're somebody who does more strength training, you hit that resistance. But we solved the problem really quick. So we took away the paper, the slide rule version of protein calculation, and gave them this. And another thing that I'm working on right now, there's a number of SUNY schools that got grants through a joint effort between the Office of Alcohol and Substance Abuse Services, and so 20 SUNY and CUNY campuses got money. I did not. It might not have been a bad thing, as I'm learning, but they want to have all of these schools assess the alcohol and perhaps also the cannabis use of all their incoming students. And so again, we're looking at online solutions of how are we going to assess that quickly. We're not also, the other issue too is do we address the issue that 18-year-olds probably aren't going to tell us the truth, but that's somebody else's problem. But that was one of the things that we figured out is like, okay, well, how are we going to do that? That doesn't already exist. But there's this 10-question thing called the audit that we use a lot within counseling and health. And again, we can just, here's our 10 questions. And all of these checkboxes are connected to a number of points. And at this point, we don't have the feedback in here, and I just have it right now just returning the total of points so I can make sure that I'm getting them navigated to the right message page. But looking at that, so kind of where we're thinking at a SUNY level now is that maybe our niche in this online training industry is to offer a variety of modules, a variety of quizzes. You download what you need and customize it to fit your campus needs. So my friend out at Tompkins Cortland Community College who feels I have an hour, I might get an hour out of my incoming students' brains to hit all of these things. So can we build something that's 30 minutes of alcohol with this thing at the end, and 15 minutes of cannabis education with that version of this at the end, and the 15 minutes of Title IX stuff at the end? How do we? And I think this is a solution that's going to work for a lot of people at a pretty low cost. So it's this very exciting thing. So these are kind of some of the planning steps. But let me pop down to here of like, what does it look like when we're in storyline? Let's post back up to here. So storyline has a couple of different views. This is what's called story view. You can see every slide in your thing. You can collapse these things. These little arrows up here will truncate it and make it go away. But you always have this opportunity to kind of look at the big picture. They consider these things scenes. In my mind, they're modules. Whatever one you create first becomes number one. You don't have to publish them in that order. You can choose all of the navigation. This little red flag means it's what storyline sees as the starting point. And then over here, there's some of these slide property things. These are a little bit more important in here. Sometimes once you get going into the nitty-gritties and you want to make sure that everything has the same, or you're troubleshooting problems, sometimes you want to be in here. And then there's these little tabs that we would recognize like being in a browser. And this means that this, if I click this, it's going to take me exactly to that slide. So slide view. And I like to think of this very similar to PowerPoint, and I think that's what helps people make the leap, because if you know how to build a slide in PowerPoint, you're going to find a lot of the same things. The ribbon exists in a pretty similar way. In fact, transitions and animations and designs are almost exactly PowerPoint. The way we do stuff. There's this additional little bit here about publish that allows you to test to make sure everything's working properly. So, preview mode. Here's every slide in this scene and how it navigates, which things are equal. So I have a slide here that can go to any one of those 6, but those ones are all going to go here at some point. I think the biggest difference is this timeline part. Coming from a music industry background, this made sense to me. I've been using Pro Tools. I've been in the video editing suites at times, so these things made sense to me. But every object that gets dropped on a slide also shows up on the timeline. So that allows me, so if I don't want somebody to click off this slide until the 30-second video is done playing, I can grab the icon down here for this continue button and just shove it all the way over to second 28. And magically appears at that point. So some of those simple things, especially when we're thinking about mandated education, that was a way to really control the functional bits. The other thing that this offers that PowerPoint doesn't is something called slide layers. So you can keep building stuff. And from what I can see from some of the under the hood game things that I've seen, this is where people really start to play, because you can make those things appear. So this is how I dealt with my, not my closed captioning, but allowing people to look at scripts if they want to go back and read. So here's a read the script. This thing is set up so that when you click this, the script shows up and you can choose to read the slide as opposed to listen to the slide. And let's see, I have some trigger button stuff here. Oh. On this insert menu, these things you probably recognize from PowerPoint. What gets exciting are some of these more functional tools of being able to add input spots. I can capture a name at the very beginning and then at the end print out a certificate with that name in it. I can, you can design your own buttons, or you can make your own. So there's some little quick widgets. There's dials and sliders. I haven't played around as much with those. You can put text into a scrolling panel by dropping in a scrolling panel and then copying and pasting your text box into it. So there's all these other little places where you can do things. The other thing with the input is you can do radio buttons and checkboxes there, and you can build your own quizzes. So there's some kind of onboard quick wizard quizzes, but what I've found really quickly is they keep you limited, so there's a lot more fun to have with those things. And then in terms of getting to the accessibility stuff, they make, I started out with Storyline 2. Storyline 3, that was like the big leap forward, where it was how much more accessibility stuff. So thinking about tab order, you can click this little button here, and here's every object on your page, and you can, when you're in here, there's these little up and down things, and you can see, and as as you click on these things, a little red box will show up over here. So you can just do and make sure that the tab order is there. And you can also get all your alternative text entered at this point too. So it's one nice easy spot to capture some of those things. Triggers, and this is the other place where like once you get to like Triggerland, oh, go forever in Triggerland. But I think what's nice is that it's a really logical wizard for adding all this functionality in it. It makes really good sense. So in this case, here's our continue button. Here's where we're at. Here's this whole trigger panel. I can say I want to create a new trigger. I would have that highlighted. I would click that. That's going to get me into new trigger land. And I'm going to get this trigger wizard. Well, what's the action I want? I want to jump to a slide when somebody hits that continue button. Well, which slide? I want to jump to this one. When do I want them to jump? When the user clicks the thing that I've mentioned up here. And what's the object that they're going to click? So it all really makes good sense. And I think that's what helps people get going. And then there's, when you want to take it up to the next level, there's these conditions that you can add as well. And then it's infinite. Maybe I don't want them to be able to go until they've read this. Maybe I don't want them to be able to go there. Maybe I want them to go to a different place if something hasn't happened. So you can really start to think and tinker and change things. So this is actually all of the different things that you can do with a trigger. You can change a variable. You can get it to play media. I haven't done a lot with white box stuff yet. Just haven't unloaded that. But you can jump to another place, and that's something I'm thinking about doing so that we can capture some anonymous data. We could pull them out of the module, send them over someplace, collect some data, and then jump them back in. I have used it to jump people to like hotline numbers and options like that. You can get it to send an email, and then all these quiz results when you start tinkering with quiz things. This is the variables view. So some of these variables get built by Storyline automatically when you start doing things, but you can also add some other stuff. So like the player display captions is populated automatically by Storyline. So that's related to closed captioning. So one of the things that I did in my modules is the very beginning of every module saying, click here to learn what ADA accessible stuff is in this. You know, what are the things that you want? Do you want to have it automatically play or not automatically play? So a student could say, yes, I want the captions to automatically play for every video, and then I can change that variable on the back end, and it just, then their experience is seamless, and it gives them what they need. And then there's a lot of quiz-related stuff. And then the other part, too, is learning how to use closed captioning, which is this whole other skill that I picked up along the way, but I find myself shooting out. So I know that there's, I think, an alternate way to do this now through the Office 360 suite. I picked up the YouTube version.
I don't think you could use String for something like this, though, because it's only for people who can log in with a SUNY Oneonta ID. So you would still, in your case, for something that's going to be used outside of this campus, want to stick to YouTube.
And so, and this is like one of those places where when I was doing my WebEx series for SUNY, we spent like half a thing just doing this so people would have access to, like, you're going to have to upload it, you're going to have to go through these things. And this is, you know, the little tinker box that you get to where YouTube does a pretty good job at approximating things. You know, things like SUNY aren't going to come through, names aren't going to come through, but what I had, because we had used the teleprompter in the video studio to shoot all these things, I had the Word documents of all the text that was written. So I started out with that window open and this window open, and I just copied and pasted because I already had the punctuation and the spelling. And then you're able to, and again, music industry degree background helping me out, is being able to see like where the natural phrases fell here, and you can take a pretty good guess. And you can just grab these boxes and change the shape and make them fit, and you can test. And most of my videos were, you know, this one was a longer one at 47 seconds. Most of them were 20-minute or 20-second ones. I think our UPD one was pretty long. That was like a minute. They do a lot, so they're allowed. And I think it's the power that you can do it. This is my dad. This is me in like 76. He was a building construction professor at SUNY Delhi. So I just grew up in this household where something's broken, you go in the basement, you get a tool and you fix it. And I, in hindsight, like he was an early adapter. He was the one who was utilizing Lotus 1, 2, 3 with his estimating classes. And people were like, why do students need to know to do this? You know, because it was 1984 or 1985, or, you know, I think he was working on an advanced degree, I think, by the late 80s. So we had like a PC in my house at a pretty young age. So that was like one of our chores, was to read data to him as he entered it. It was like my sister and I fought over who was going to have to do that. Doing those things, but I think, you know, in hindsight, what were the things that allowed me to take on this project? And I think having that kind of can-do attitude, like, yeah, we can fix that, we can build that, I have the tools. So there were a lot of skills that came along the way, but recognizing like how far ahead I am on accessibility now compared to the rest of the college, and recognizing that we're all going to be expected to be there at some point. And again, our younger colleagues coming in are going to be getting this as content in their college classes, and this is just where we're going as a culture. And I think also knowing what you know and knowing what you don't know. Like, I did capture some video on cell phones and little video cameras just because we were on the crunch and we needed it, but then recognizing that we had video people who could do this, knowing that a 20-second video takes about 30 minutes to shoot, like, but you can get somebody comfortable in the studio reading a teleprompter, looking natural, and then it's just a matter of how many times you have to do it to get the perfect take. So I think we have all of those things, but I think the other lovely thing is like how much better my relationships are with all of these people. Like, once people saw what I was doing, they were excited to be a part of it, and that's been really fun. And then also getting to connect with other people and other institutions, and I think this is where it's changed where I'm going. I know there was one college in Hawaii who downloaded the software, the program that we built. I was like, I'm available to go to Hawaii to help them on site. Like, I could do that. There's a group of people in a couple of different schools in Canada that we're going to work together because their laws read a little bit differently, or the language they needed to use was differently, but they realized they could work together to do that. There was a school in Florida, Joe Storch at SUNY Legal does a lot of Title IX training. He's the expert at SUNY Legal on all these sexual violence prevention laws, and he goes out and he trains. And this woman in Florida brought her laptop to show him how she was already starting to adapt it. And she was in a situation where she had never had budget because all of the money was going to this third-party vendor. So she, did this, well, if you buy me the software license for $700, I can save the school $35,000 every year. And now she has a $9,000 budget. So the school walked away feeling like it was a win, and now she has budget to do stuff. And I think the other interesting thing too is like all of these campuses are like jumping on this as a solution, and nobody's got good data yet. Like, how does this fit in? The people publishing the most data are the third-party vendors. So we only have biased data. But I think at the end of the day, you need a lot of quivers, or you need a lot of arrows in your quiver to deal with these issues and save money where you can. But I think the other thing too is knowing that I have complete control of the messaging that goes to my students, that the messaging that they get from day one about how we deal with these issues on our campus is picked up at orientation, and it's the same language, and we've already primed them to know that I'm the face, and all of these other little bits, all these little pieces that we get to take along the way. Online education is not going away. How we use it is going to adapt and change. I don't see a point where we give that up. So the sooner we jump on, I think the better. And also for me, like I said, the ability to give a nonlinear presentation is really exciting, to be able to be in the moment with the student and following them through. So things that we're looking at this semester, and I've got a student intern, I'm just like, go figure this out. Like, how do we create a thing, and we'll build it and articulate storyline for the navigation, that if I'm a student and I've experienced a thing, and I have a specific question, I want to know the answer, because there are so many people who are mandated reporters on campus that, if I live on campus and I say something to my RA, there's a protocol. They have to get an RD, they have to call UPD, and while that information is contained, there's still a letting go of the ownership of that content. So knowing that I can put it online and we can tell students this is where it's at, and she's having a good time. She brought me back a picture. She found an actual real blackboard somewhere on this campus, and she just came back with this panorama picture, and and she was starting to think it through. And said, "Now let me show you how it's going to look in a slide." And she's like, her eyes got big, like, We can make it, there's a variable. Are you a faculty staff looking for support? Are you an RA trying to remember your protocol? Are you a student looking to find the answer to a question? And now we can move you through.
So do you host these in Blackboard?
These are hosted in Blackboard.
So it's a Blackboard course.
Yes. So we actually have it in as an organization, so that it kind of is
And that's with
separate.
SUNY Albany?
It's here.
On this campus.
On our
it's an
campus, it's at
organization?
Blackboard. It's an
The Blackboard
organization.
organization
I'm
in
not
our
sure
campus.
where they put it in Blackboard at SUNY Albany. That's a good question to ask, how they chose to do
And
it.
so the students self-enroll, or do you enroll?
We populated that,
You populate them.
which, interesting hurdles. And this was like, I had hoped to launch August 1st. We were still videotaping on August 2nd. And I remember like asking Chilton questions, and I was not retaining the answers. I just was retaining the fact that Chilton knows the answer to this question. Duly noted. I'll be okay. So, and there were definitely like some coding things that didn't work, and I feel like I'm still like trying to figure those things out. Like, why?
Do you have any idea how many students access the learning in a browser on a computer versus a mobile device, like an iPad?
I'm not sure on that. That's what it.
Those can all be viewed on an
It can
iPad,
be
right? It's
viewed,
all
yeah.
HTML5.
Yes. And when you publish, Articulate has like a sliding thing, because they also have their own browser thing that will work too, but that doesn't work with screen readers. So you have to be, so you can be fully HTML5, you can be HTML5 with Flash fallback, you can be Flash with HTML fallback, and then totally
I mean,
Flash.
fully HTML5 is the one that works with screen readers, right? And
Right. Yes.
that's the best one to do.
Yes.
And that was the other thing with picking up the Kindle Fires really cheap, was being able to turn one of those into screen reader mode and going through the tutorials and start, how does this work? And I had a student working with me last semester, student disability services, and I switched my cell phone over, and I panicked, and I was like, I don't know how to get out of this, and she's like, do. I was like, all right, well, we need to, and then I found the refer for $30, and there's my solution. But it is interesting to think about, how do other people navigate when you're so dependent on the site as your skill, and like, how do I make this robust and interesting, but also having a conversation with a student who could talk about that shift of having sight earlier in life and having to transition their learning skills in a whole different way, which is amazing too, or like taking the time on a Saturday, like I'm going to take the Spark class with only my tab and return gate, and it better work. So, and recognizing like I actually utilize that a lot more in my daily life, because it makes a lot of sense. Tab and shift tab and return. So, or even closed captioning. Like I'm so frustrated now with things that don't have closed captioning. Like, it's nice.
And also, well, my husband's French and my daughter's from Colombia. We adopted her from Colombia. We always have the closed captioning on when we watch movies, because for him, there's just things he won't catch and he needs to read it. So it's not even just about disability services, it's just about access to understanding what's, the content.
And I also learned the term WCAG 2.0, which does nothing to stun my health educator friends, but I was like, go back and when you start talking with your technology people, tell them you're aware of WCAG 2.0. So you don't even know what it means. Just drop that and they will be your friend. Like, shows that you're in the in crowd. So, and I think, there was a lot of invested time up front, but now I can look at like the long-term game of like, okay, like I've got a couple of students looking at stuff and I'm like, what are the worst slides in here? What are the least dynamic? And how do we fix that going forward? Of knowing that we can go through now, and if there is a change, it's quick, and fix it. We get a new
continuous improvement, basically.
Yeah. I mean, like I'm already like reaching out to the president's office, because in the Spark class we have Dr. K doing a welcome and a closing. I'm like, I need to be on. I'm sure that when the new president gets here, there's going to be a day that they're over in IRC. So can we get this in there as well? Because this is where it falls. But again, what does that say to a student when they open up their sexual violence course and the first thing they see is the president saying this is an important issue on this campus, and you don't get that with any of those other these other vendors, or they're charging you by the hour. Like you get like certain amount of customization at this fee, but if you want this, it's this fee.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
University of Nebraska was quoted at $180 a year.
How they can get, I think they can get away with charging that. So that's really cool.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really rethinking.
Yeah.
I was like, think David and Goliath. Like, yeah, it's not as flashy, you know, literally and figuratively. But you know what? We got this out of the gate without doing really good evaluation procedures, and SUNY's trying to track down the people who can maybe do that, because we still have a number of SUNY campuses that are in contracts with other vendors. So we're kind of at this point where we could still do that, but we ask our RAs to retake these classes every year so that they're fluent with the content. And I had an RA who's a senior this year, so he had taken the online one 3 times in a row and then took this one, and he came back, he's like, this was really nice. This was exactly what I needed to know. It wasn't excessive. It was pertinent to my campus.
And focused on this campus.
Yeah. And I think, my experience with taking students to national conferences is that it's very pocketed. The way we do things in the Northeast is really different than how we do things in other states, or like Bill Woodward, who's our director of community standards, his previous institution was a collection of community colleges. And so the language that you need for that base of students is completely different.
Were any of the vendors upset about this? Because obviously they look at SUNY and their 63 campuses and they see like money's in this or anything.
I don't know.
And then you're making your own, and they're like, whoa.
Yeah, well, and I think that's why we're kind of at this point, like, we know we got to get a legit evaluator in to do the evaluation, because we know that they're going to they've got money, because they've been collecting money, so they've got the money to blow us out. We're like, all my professional conferences, they're the vendors. So it was kind of, I was very purposeful in not reviewing any of their programs when I was doing my build, because I didn't want to, by accident, like, grab onto something, and be within a copyright infringement. So it was really purposeful of staying away from that stuff. But at the same time, they're also, the data that they have and are not sharing is also interesting to me as well. Like, how are people mandating, and what are there rewards for early compliance? Are there punishments for just looking at that. And at one point I was talking with somebody who was working there, and because New York State is such an institutionally dense state, they could kind of pull us out because they had enough clients to look at how people were doing stuff. So, like, to me, those are some of the interesting things that really could extrapolate to any delivery. Got my fingers crossed that the grant money that they're chasing now will get the evaluation in place. But my guess is that any one-time effort is going to have a bubble effect.
Right.
We're not changing behavior.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's really
Thank you.